Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to pop a Ditsy floral into repeat. So firstly, because you're working with such a small design and a small element, I usually half my canvas from 64 to 32. So I'll quickly pop my rulers in and then change my canvas back to 64 just so I can see what I'm working with. Next, I'll chop all my elements so they're all separate and sitting on a separate layer. I just find it good practice to keep as many layers as you can, and it just gives you a bit more control when you're constructing your bouquets and moving things around. It's also great for the client to have all their elements on different layers as well, so they can fiddle with colour and things like that. So the shortcut for chopping and popping an element onto a separate layer is Command-Shift-J, and the shortcut for the lasso tool is L. So once I've got them all on separate layers, I just want to start building little bunches. I find if you pop your elements off your working area, that also helps as well, just because it can get a little bit cluttered if you've got everything in your working space, and it makes it a little bit tricky to design when you've got things hanging around. So looking at my mood board, I've focused on this reference down here, the purple, red, and the pinky tones, just for composition. And then for colour, I'm looking at this sort of design up there. And when you're designing something so simple, you just want to create as much movement as you can, just to keep some interest within your design, just because the elements are so simple. You don't want the layout to be the same. You want it to be something interesting and something worth purchasing. I guess you've got to make sure it's worth the customer investing in. And when you're designing with colours that are quite similar, you just want to make sure that things are not on top of each other. So you don't want a blue right above a blue. You want it sort of shifted off to the side, so your eye's not creating, I guess, railway tracks up and down your design. And I like to use the smaller leaves to fill in gaps as well. And you also want to remember to change their size so that you've got a varied scale of elements within your design. So here you just want to sort of get rid of those three that are in a line, just because your eye is going to follow that line throughout the design. So once you've got a cluster that's sort of working well and you're happy with how it's flowing, you can just copy that entire group and turn it and send it in a different direction. At this stage, I always like to zoom in at 66.67% just so you can see the scale, see if it's getting too big or too small. I will probably reduce the size of this just a little bit because it is a Ditsy floral and you want to keep it quite small because that's what the customer's after. So these kind of designs are used quite a lot in swimwear. And the smaller the floral is, the better, just because it's going over smaller pieces of clothing. And the customer obviously wants it to look, I guess, more like a texture as opposed to a huge floral artwork. You also want to be mindful that the design is not too small because you want it to still be screen printable if that is what the customer requires. So I guess just building your design in a way that is very easy to sell. You don't want to limit its sellability at all. You want it to reach all different customers and all their needs. So again, I can go ahead and just copy small chunks from my big chunk as well to fill in the space. And then I'll also, just to make sure my design's in repeat, I'll grab these top elements that are falling over your top line and I will copy and paste them and then send them down 32 centimeters. And this will ensure that they're 100% in repeat when I start to build it out. And I find it's nice to get rid of the white space with a lot of foliage. It just makes the design look more alive and less digitally created, I guess. So as before, because this one is falling on our top line, I just want to duplicate it and send it down. And the shortcut for sending it is Command T, and then you pop in how much you want to send it down, so 32 centimeters in your Y axis, so that way, and then enter and it'll send it down. And whilst you're designing, again, you just want to make sure that you're not creating lines of the same color, because your eye tends to follow those sort of things around the page and you don't want it to look not natural, I guess. I just want to make sure there's a nice balance of color going around the page, going around your design. Okay, so now once I know that I've used all my elements as well, I'll just get rid of those ones up here just to keep my page tidy. Use this little guy, just pop in there. And then again, so like we did on our y-axis, I'll repeat the same thing on our x-axis. So I'll grab everything that's following this line here and overlapping that line. I'll copy it and then I'll transform it 32 centimeters to the right. And then I'll grab this whole section because it's already designed and I will move it over here, just so I can fill in that chunk of space and not have to redesign all that area. You obviously can if you would like to, but I think it just saves time and you want to make sure you're being efficient when designing as well. So then I would just go through and fill in these gaps. Again, making sure that I repeat anything that is falling on my two lines. So minus 32 will send it up. You can grab large chunks from your existing design as well and just move them around. I think it's also important for Ditsy's to keep a little bit of white space in certain areas just to give the eye a chance to breathe, because these designs can get quite dense, which is fine if that's what your brief or your mood board requires. But I think a lot of the more successful Ditsys have a little bit of breathing space. And then I will just do a similar thing to this little gap as well. Make sure those get sent down to the bottom as well, like we've been doing throughout the design. And even though I'm using the same layout from this section, I just want to either lower it or rotate it slightly so the customer's not seeing the repeat within the design. I guess you just want to trick the eye to not be able to find the repeat, because once it's on clothing, I think it's quite distracting when you can see the design in a square. You can sort of tell that it was designed in a square. So that one is ever so slightly falling on the line. We want to make sure we send that one backwards. I'll just go through and fill in any really big sort of open white spaces with foliage just to make sure that the majority of the ground is getting covered, because you don't want it to fall on swimwear and have a huge white space. That would be not very pleasing. And then a good way to make sure that you don't have too much white space is sort of squinting your eye slightly. And if your eye naturally gravitates to a certain spot, I would probably fill that in, just because it's quite likely that the customer will see that blank space as well. Perfect. So once you've covered your 32 centimeter repeat tile, you just grab your marquee tool, which is this one, and grab the section. And if you just look at the measurements down the bottom right hand side, you can make sure that you've made the correct selection. So 32 by 32 centimeters. And then if you just go to Edit, which is at the top of your toolbar, and Define Pattern, and press OK. Then you could grab all your elements together and just Command G, which will group them. Switch that one off. Marquee your 64 centimeter repeat tile. And if you just go to this little half moon down the bottom and press Pattern, you can grab your pattern down here, and this will show you your design repeated outwards. So if we get rid of our rulers and just zoom in a little bit, we can make sure that the design is fully into repeat and there's no elements that have been half chopped off. And you can also check the flow of your design this way as well. You don't have to keep it to a 64 centimeter canvas, but I think this is a good way just to make sure your repeat is correct and it does flow. And then I guess the other thing you're looking out for is colors creating lines or railroad tracks. You don't want anything that goes directly up and down or side to side as well. So I think this is like a nice even distribution of color. Your eye's not finding the square repeat as well. So then what I would do is add another layer on top, grab them both, and then Command E will merge them as one. So this will now become your 64 centimeter repeat tile. And then in this section, you would just label it your elements in a 32 centimeter repeat because that was the size that we designed it in. And then just ensure that your rulers are still showing, and this will show the customer exactly where the design repeats. And now you're ready for your next lesson.